Jenna Wadsworth of Wake County is the Democratic nominee seeking to become our state's next Commissioner of Agriculture. Ms. Wadsworth, thanks for coming by the studio for a conversation tonight.
Thanks so much for having me, Kelly.
Well, you might be the most social media savvy candidate of anyone in this state, certainly for Ag Commissioner. But who are you? Tell us your background. What brings you into the race for 2020?
Well, I grew up on a hog, cow, chicken, corn, cotton, tobacco, and soybean farm on a dirt road in Johnston County. And some of my earliest memories are on the farm. I remember what it was like being chased through rows of tobacco by guinea hens because I befriended their chicks. I remember what it was like to play hide and seek in our corn and grain silos, or to shell snap peas into one of those big old metal wash basins on our back porch with my granny, or the first time my daddy made me climb up on our farm all 100 and run rows. Now, to this day, he and I still argue about how straight those rows were, but that is a different story for a different time. And so agriculture is in my blood, and I am running for this office, for the North Carolina Commissioner of Agriculture's office, in order to help support the more than 40,000 farmers who call North Carolina home. This is our state's biggest, most economically viable industry, contributing something like $92.7 billion to our state's economy annually. And so I'm committed to taking an industry that's largely been left in the past and moving it into the future, creating a more sustainable, just, equitable future for every single person who calls North Carolina home. And I think that through agriculture, we have the key to addressing food insecurity, climate change, looking at new economic markets that produce social, economic, and environmental justice opportunities for this state, and more.
You know, I looked at your website, and I was going to bring this up as my next question once we had the get to know you question. But you have a huge platform of ideas and thoughts on a whole host of issues. What's your number one issue if you're elected?
Addressing climate change, because we cannot afford not to do it. And I believe that not addressing climate change would be a dereliction of duty on behalf of the Commissioner's office. The reality is that storms are going to grow more intense and more frequent over time. Our farmers are really struggling. You know, there are apple orchard owners in Henderson County who largely can't get crop insurance anymore because blooming seasons are unpredictable. There are coastal fisher people who don't know what their haul is going to look like because of changing ocean currents. So we have to give rural communities a chance to be put back to work, and that means looking at addressing one of the biggest issues facing this industry. Not just that, but in my work the last 10 years as a Wake County Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor, where I'm proud to serve the 1.2 million people who call Wake County home, we've made big investments in environmental education programming in both our public and private schools. Because I know that it's our children who have to live with the brunt of our inaction on climate change unless we begin to elect leaders who are unapologetic in addressing the climate crisis head on from day one.
When you say you want to address the climate crisis head on as Ag Commissioner, are you seeing portions of our agricultural industry as part of the problem, or is the agricultural industry in general a victim of climate change caused by other industries?
Well, I don't think farmers would ever want to think of themselves as victims. They are strong, hardworking individuals. Anybody who knows a farmer knows it's one of the hardest jobs there is. You're going to work long days. You're going to toil under hot sun or in cold weather, and you've got a lot of overhead and a very low profit margin. And so when you talk about farmers, they're overwhelmingly facing something called farm stress because we're not addressing climate change. We're not creating economic opportunities for them. We're not looking at options to move into regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, to talk about how our urban centers can put green roofs on their buildings and create community gardens. And so as a result of that mounting farm stress, a lot of our farmers are going bankrupt because, again, we're not addressing some of the biggest issues that are facing them in their crop yields and their harvest times. And as a result of that, they're committing suicide at very high rates. And I know that's something that's not very exciting or cheery to talk about, but the reality is it is a crisis in the agricultural community. The people who have the institutional knowledge to grow our food are ending their life because they feel helpless and hopeless. I believe that's unacceptable. I think the leader of the agricultural industry should be screaming from the rooftops and be working to address this issue and provide hope and opportunity to our farmers so they can continue doing the great work that they're doing in North Carolina.
Let's talk about resiliency. I did see this on your platform. You say writing a relief check shouldn't be our only solution to natural disaster. So how do you help our farmers prepare for the next hurricane? We can throw in tornadoes and floods, if you will.
That's a great question. So I am committed to creating a division within the North Carolina Department of Agriculture that works to specifically address climate change and building resiliency and sustainability into both our farm and community planning. We have to connect members of this industry. We have to connect the community. This isn't something that we can fix in a vacuum. It takes solutions from a number of different partners. It means looking at renewable energy and the opportunity that that holds, especially in solar leases, which for a lot of farmers who don't know what's going to happen if the next generation is ready to take over, solar is a way to allow them to keep their land in farmland and to remain economically profitable during that time period. We also have to look at educating our children about the dangers of climate change. And so there's all of those things that we can do, and I look forward to getting to do them.
Let me ask you about the urban-rural divide. Wake County is becoming an urban county. It's viewed as an urban county, but 80% of the other counties are designated as rural or country. How do you bridge that? How do you make sure issues for rural North Carolina are heard when the demand from an agricultural secretary from an urban county might be quite different?
So like I said, I'm committed to putting rural North Carolinians back to work. And I believe that, there's a pathway to doing so through bridging the urban-rural divide. And while I have been elected in Wake County for the past decade, I also grew up on a farm on a dirt road in Johnston County. I have lived in both worlds and understand better than most what it is that these great disparities that are facing rural North Carolinians. So I'm committed to making sure that we advocate for investments in rural healthcare, because if you are not healthy, you cannot be an economically productive citizen. And the average age of the farmer in North Carolina is actually 2 years older than what it is throughout the country. So we absolutely have to address this issue. And on top of that, I believe that we have to make meaningful investments in rural broadband access, because if you don't have the technology to compete in the statewide or global marketplace, you can't. And farming is a business just like any others, even though a lot of times people from the outside mostly see farming for the utilitarian nature of food production. But the farmers that I've spoken to, especially those throughout this pandemic who have remained successful, are those who knew how to use technology efficiently and effectively in order to reach their consumers and let them know that they were still open for business.
A lot of the issues I've seen on your platform will involve legislative cooperation, or at least you getting their ear and attempting to influence them in some way. How do you propose doing that? What is your relationship with Republicans when they come to Raleigh from outside the Triangle region?
Well, I would hope, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, that you would support our hardworking farmers throughout this state. And I think, no matter your partisan affiliation, you realize the importance of supporting our farmers who are producing our food or helping us put our clothes on our backs. And so, agriculture is an industry where it's less important to think about partisan divides and more important to think about making sure that we have access to clean drinking water, that we have healthy, nutritious food. I think something and an issue that I'm very passionate about, and that I believe, whether you're Democrat or Republican, that you would agree is important, is addressing food insecurity in the state. In particular, we have 1 in 5 children in North Carolina who are food insecure. I think that's absolutely criminal in a state that grows so much of the nation's food. I have multiple plans to address that, including putting a garden on every school ground. I've been endorsed by the North Carolina Association of Educators, so I know our teachers are excited and ready to get to work to help me do that. That's also a way to address food insecurity and to teach our next generation of environmental stewards. But, there's a way to imagine a world where we don't have to have farm subsidies. What if legislative leaders were willing to work to create a program where we're essentially contracting with farmers here in North Carolina to help provide the food that will end up on our children's plates, so they have more healthy, nutritious produce and healthy food options that are locally grown and more sustainable and nutritious for them at a time when they absolutely need access to high-quality nutrition.
Let's talk about your hemp policy. Hemp's already very popular in rural areas where tobacco was once king. You want to take it a step further and say it's time to legalize cannabis. What would that do, cannabis legalization, for our agricultural economy that hemp currently is not doing?
So I should start by saying I do support the legalization of cannabis both medicinally and recreationally. The reality is it's already legal in 33 states plus D.C., either medicinally, recreationally, or a combination thereof. So it's not a question of if it's going to happen, it's a question of when it's going to happen. And when it does, I want to make sure that we create a just and equitable industry that actually benefits people who call North Carolina home, that benefits our small farmers so large corporate producers from out of state can't come in here and buy up large swaths of land. And I think there's a huge economic opportunity for our farmers, for our rural communities, especially those who are facing the mounting opioid epidemic. There's the ability to put money back into the state's coffers to fund the things that really matter to us. Because the reality is COVID-19 has created some major budget shortfalls in places. And I believe that our budget should absolutely reflect our values and priorities in society. And this is a way to make that happen.
You say you want a garden in every public school. I notice your platform contains discussion of adding environmental education in part of every child's lessons at some grade or another. What's the difference in environmental education and science and biology?
It is a form of science and biology, and I think there's a way to make sure that our children understand where their food is coming from. Let's talk about horticulture, let's talk about agricultural education. And there's also been studies that link the ability to spend time outdoors and in nature with mental health and with the ability for students to learn effectively. And so getting their hands dirty, putting their hands in the soil and growing something, I think that's a real opportunity for them.
If you're elected Commissioner of Agriculture, what kind of leader will you be for those thousands of employees who call the Department of Agriculture, the source of their career?
Well, I look forward to getting to work with all these people who are making our industry, work and be successful. Now, something I have noticed in the department right now is sometimes we don't pay attention to or support diverse voices, and I'm committed to making sure that they have a seat at the table. And I'm someone who firmly believes that you cannot effectively govern or lead from within an echo chamber surrounded by people whose experiences mirror your own. And so I want to make sure that we are bringing unique, diverse voices to the table. Representation matters, so that way we can create a more equitable, just, and sustainable future that works for every single person who calls this state home instead of just the select few.
We have about 45 seconds left. Who's sitting at that table when you call that meeting? What types of people?
I want to make sure that we have someone from the black farming community. Black farmers have roughly 1/10 of the land now that they did a century ago in this country. That's because of discrimination that they've been facing. I want to make sure we have small farmers, that we have coastal fisher people, that we have apple orchard growers, that we have people who are looking at addressing sustainability and resiliency and addressing climate change, and our teachers.
Audience, this is Jenna Wadsworth from Wake County, the Democratic nominee for Commissioner of Agriculture. She is on the 2020 ballot. Jenna, thank you so much for coming in and having a discussion with not only myself, but with the viewers at home.
Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone wants to find out more information, visit jennawadsworth.com to join the fight.